Hello. I'm really glad you're here tonight. This hour is different from the rest of the day. It doesn't ask you to decide anything. It doesn't ask you to perform or explain or keep up. It simply invites you to lie still and let your thoughts move at their own pace. As the years pass, nighttime becomes a kind of companion, a place where the mind is free to wander without interruption, where memories return, not urgently, but patiently, where understanding settles in quietly, without needing words. Later in life, the mind doesn't race the way it once did. It reflects, it revisits, it connects dots that once seemed unrelated. And it does this most honestly when the lights are off and the world has gone silent. This space is for those thoughts, the ones that don't surface during the day, the ones that arrive only when you're alone with yourself, resting, remembering, and gently making sense of a long lived-in life. Tonight, we're traveling somewhere unexpected, somewhere that might seem distant at first, but will bring you closer to yourself than you imagine. We're traveling to the heart of Central Africa, to a kingdom that flourished centuries ago, to the hands of artists who transformed wood into memory, to the Luba Kingdom wood carvers, whose work speaks across time to something you understand deeply now in this season of your life. So take a slow breath, let your body soften into the bed, and allow this night to meet you where you are. And now, before we begin, if this kind of honest, gentle reflection speaks to you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. And down in the comments, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are right now. There's something comforting about knowing we're all here together, scattered across time zones, but united in these late hours when the world finally grows still. So settle in, adjust your pillows, find a comfortable position, and know that for the next hour, you're not alone in whatever wisdom you're carrying, whatever understanding you've earned, whatever truths rise to the surface when the lights go out. Let's begin. You're lying in the darkness now, and your breathing is finding its rhythm. In and out, steady, unhurried. The way breath moves when there's nowhere else to be and nothing else to prove. Your body knows this rhythm. It's practiced it for decades, thousands upon thousands of nights, learning how to let go, how to surrender to rest, how to trust the darkness. Tonight, as you breathe, imagine something else breathing with you, something ancient, something patient. Imagine a forest in Central Africa, in what is now the Democratic Republic of Congo, a forest that has stood for centuries, breathing in sunlight, breathing out oxygen, growing slowly, patiently, the way all important things grow. In this forest, long ago, there were trees that would become sacred, trees that held a particular kind of destiny in their wood grain, in their cellular structure, in the very fiber of their being. They didn't know this, of course. They simply grew, year after year, ring after ring, storing sunlight and rain and time itself in their expanding trunks. You understand this kind of patient growth now, don't you? You've lived long enough to see how things develop slowly, how wisdom isn't acquired in moments but accumulated over decades, how understanding grows ring by ring, season by season, experience layered upon experience, until something solid stands where nothing was before. Breathe with this forest. Feel your chest rise and fall, like wind moving through ancient branches. In the Luba Kingdom, which reached its height between the 16th and 19th centuries, there were artists who approached these trees with reverence. They were called wood carvers, but that term doesn't capture what they truly were. They were memory keepers, story holders, spiritual intermediaries, philosophers working in wood instead of words. These carvers would select a tree carefully. Not just any tree would do. They looked for wood with the right grain, the right density, the right spirit. They believed the tree itself had to agree to the transformation, had to be willing to become something beyond itself, to hold meaning that would outlast the forest, outlast the kingdom, outlast the individual lives of everyone who would ever touch it. You know something about this, don't you? About being chosen for transformation? About life selecting you for experiences you didn't seek but couldn't refuse? About being carved by circumstances into someone you didn't expect to become? The carver would approach the chosen tree at dawn. He would speak to it first, explain what was needed, ask permission, offer gratitude. This wasn't superstition. This was respect, recognition that he was about to take something living and transform it into something that would carry the sacred. Then he would begin to cut. The first cut was always the hardest. The moment of commitment, the point of no return, the blade entering the bark, the living wood, the sap flowing like blood, the tree giving itself to become something more than tree, something that would hold human memory, human longing, human connection to the divine. As you lie here in the darkness, you can almost hear that first cut, the sound of blade meeting wood, the sound of transformation beginning. It echoes through the centuries, that sound. It reaches you here, now, in this bed, in this moment. Your life has been full of first cuts, hasn't it? Moments when something ended so something else could begin. Moments when you were carved away from what you were to become what you needed to be. Those cuts hurt. They always hurt. But they were necessary. The carver worked slowly. There was no rushing this process. He would remove wood carefully, thoughtfully, revealing the form that waited inside. He believed the figure already existed within the tree. His job wasn't to create it, but to uncover it, to release it from the excess wood that surrounded it. Day after day, he would return to his work, cutting away, smoothing, refining. His hands knew the wood intimately, could feel where it wanted to yield and where it wanted to resist, could sense the grain, the flow, the hidden patterns that determined how the blade should move. This took weeks, sometimes months, sometimes years for the most important pieces. There was no hurry. The work required the time it required. To rush would be to ruin. To force would be to break. The wood had its own wisdom, its own timing, and the carver had to honor that. You understand this completely now. You've learned that the most important things cannot be rushed. The transformation happens on its own schedule. The trying to force growth or healing or change only damages the process. You've learned patience because life carved it into you year after year, experience after experience. The Luba carvers created many things. staffs and stools and headrests and bowls. But their most sacred work, their most profound contribution to human artistry, was the memory board, the Lukasa. These were wooden boards, usually rectangular, sometimes oval, carved with intricate patterns and studded with beads and pins. They looked abstract to outsiders, random arrangements of metal and shell and carved lines, but to those who could read them, they were encyclopedias, history books, spiritual texts, maps of knowledge that preserved the entire cultural memory of the Luba people. Each Lukasa was unique. Each told different stories. Each held different knowledge. The patterns represented migration routes, genealogies, spiritual teachings, historical events, moral lessons. Everything that mattered was encoded in wood and metal and arrangement. But here's what makes them extraordinary. They couldn't be read by just anyone. You had to be trained. You had to spend years learning how to interpret the patterns. The Lukasa wasn't meant to give up its secrets easily. It required dedication, study, relationship. You had to earn the right to understand. This speaks to something you know deeply now, doesn't it? That the most valuable knowledge isn't obvious. That wisdom reveals itself only to those who approach it with patience and respect. That you can't force understanding. You can only prepare yourself to receive it when it's ready to be given. The carver who made a Lukasa was doing something profound. He was taking the living wood of a tree and transforming it into a vessel for collective memory. He was ensuring that the wisdom of the ancestors wouldn't die when individuals died. That knowledge would persist beyond any single lifetime. He carved knowing he would die, knowing the people who taught him would die, knowing everyone currently alive would die, but the Lukasa would remain. The wood would outlast flesh. The patterns would outlast memory. The knowledge would continue. You think about legacy now, in ways you didn't when you were young. You think about what remains after you're gone, what you've built or taught or created that might outlast your own breathing. What marks you've carved into the world that won't be erased when you are. The Luba carvers worked alone, usually in quiet spaces, often at night by firelight. The dancing shadows would play across the wood as they worked. The flickering light would make the emerging forms seem to move, seem to breathe, seem to come alive. They worked in silence mostly. This wasn't work that required conversation. It required attention, presence, a kind of meditation where the hands moved but the mind remained still, where technique became so natural it no longer needed conscious thought, where the carver and the carving merged into a single act of creation. You've experienced this state, haven't you? Times in your life when you were so absorbed in something that time disappeared. When your hands knew what to do without your mind directing them. When you entered a flow state where everything felt exactly right, exactly aligned, exactly as it should be. Maybe it was in your work. Maybe it was in creating something with your hands. Maybe it was in caring for someone you loved. Maybe it was in a hobby or craft or practice that became meditation through repetition. Whatever it was, you remember that feeling, that sense of being completely present, completely engaged, completely yourself. The Luba carvers achieved this state regularly. It was part of their spiritual practice. They believed that when they carved in this state of presence, they weren't working alone. The ancestors were guiding their hands. The spirits were directing the blade. The wood itself was participating in its own transformation. This might sound mystical to modern ears, but you understand it, don't you? You've lived long enough to know that there are moments when you're doing something and it feels like you're being helped by forces beyond yourself. When things align in ways that seem impossible, when the right word comes, the right action emerges, the right solution appears, and you didn't consciously think it up. It just arrived. The carvers called this connection to something larger than themselves. You might call it intuition, or flow, or grace, or simply experience so deep it operates below conscious thought. Whatever name you give it, you know it's real. You felt it. As you breathe here in the darkness, your body is so relaxed now. Your muscles have softened. Your jaw has unclenched. Your shoulders have dropped away from your ears. Your hands have opened. You're releasing the tension you didn't even know you were carrying. You're letting go the way the wood let go when the carver's blade removed what wasn't needed. The Luba Kingdom itself was built on the idea of sacred kingship. The king wasn't just a political leader. He was a spiritual figure, a connection between the human and divine realms. His body was considered sacred. His person was protected by elaborate rituals and prohibitions. He rarely appeared in public. When he did, he sat on a carved wooden stool created by master carvers specifically for this purpose. These royal stools were remarkable objects carved from a single piece of wood. They often featured a supporting figure, a caryatid, usually female, a woman kneeling or standing, her arms raised, supporting the seat where the king would sit, her body bearing the weight of leadership, her strength making his authority possible. These female figures weren't decorative. They represented the Luba understanding that power requires support. That leadership depends on those who hold it up. That kingship was impossible without the foundation provided by others. The carved woman holding up the seat was an acknowledgement of dependence, of gratitude, of the truth that no one stands alone. You know this truth intimately now. You know how many people have held you up over the years, how many hands have supported you when you couldn't support yourself. How many times you would have collapsed without someone there to bear some of your weight. You know that whatever you've achieved, whatever you've become, you didn't do it alone. You were held up, just like the carved figures holding up the king's seat. And you know the reverse is also true. You've been the support for others. You've held people up when they couldn't stand. You've borne weight that wasn't yours to bear because someone needed you to. You've been the caryatid, arms raised, muscles straining, holding steady, so someone else could rest. This is what the Luba carvers understood, that life is mutual, that we hold each other up, that strength isn't about standing alone, but about the web of support we create together. They carved this understanding into wood so it wouldn't be forgotten. The carvers themselves were trained from childhood. A boy would be apprenticed to a master carver, usually a relative. He would spend years learning, first just watching, then preparing materials, then practicing on scrap wood, then attempting simple forms, Then, finally, after many years, being allowed to work on important pieces. This apprenticeship wasn't just about technique, it was about character formation. The master carver was teaching patience, humility, attention to detail, respect for materials, understanding of symbolism. He was shaping a person, not just training a craftsman. The apprentice learned by doing the same thing over and over, cutting the same way, smoothing the same way, carving the same patterns until they became automatic, until his hands remembered even when his mind forgot, until the knowledge lived in his body, not just his head. You learned this way too, didn't you? The most important things you know, you didn't learn from books or lectures. You learned them by doing, by repetition, by failing and trying again, by practice so extended it became part of you, by experience so deep it changed not just what you knew, but who you were. The master carver would correct the apprentice gently but firmly, would point out where the cut went wrong, would demonstrate the proper angle, would explain why this wood required a different approach than that would share the knowledge accumulated over generations. But he would also allow failure, would let the apprentice ruin pieces, would watch him struggle, would resist the urge to step in and fix everything, because he knew that real learning required real struggle, that growth came through difficulty, that the apprentice had to earn his skill through his own effort, his own mistakes, his own gradual improvement. You've been both apprentice and master in your life, haven't you? You've learned from people who are patient with your learning, and you've taught others, trying to find the balance between helping and allowing them to struggle. You know how hard it is to watch someone you care about make mistakes, how strong the urge is to step in and fix things. But you also know that sometimes the kindest thing is to let people learn the hard way. As years passed, the apprentice would gradually become a carver in his own right. The transition wasn't marked by a ceremony or announcement. It happened slowly, incrementally. One day, the master would give him a more important task, then another, until eventually the apprentice realized he was no longer practicing. He was creating. He was trusted. He had become what he'd been working toward. This is how you became who you are now. Not through a single moment of transformation, but through accumulated experience, through years of practice, through mistakes and corrections and gradual improvement, through time itself shaping you the way the carver's blade shaped wood. You didn't notice it happening. But one day, you looked up and realized you'd become someone different, someone more skilled, someone more capable, someone who knew things you hadn't known before. The wood the carvers used was alive once. It grew in soil and rain and sunlight. It was part of a forest ecosystem. Birds nested in its branches. Insects burrowed in its bark. Its roots connected to other roots underground, creating a network of shared resources and communication. When it was cut, it died, but it also became something new. It was transformed from living tree into artistic material, from forest organism into cultural object. Its death enabled a different kind of life, a life in human hands, a life as carrier of meaning and memory and spiritual significance. This transformation required violence. The tree had to be cut, had to be killed, had to be removed from everything it knew. This was necessary. There was no gentle way to harvest wood. The blade had to bite deep. The saw had to tear through fibers. The tree had to fall. But this violence wasn't meaningless. It was purposeful. The tree was being honored, even as it was destroyed. It was being invited into a different kind of existence. One where it would matter in new ways, where it would be touched and valued and preserved, where it would carry importance beyond its own biological life. Your life has required similar violence, hasn't it? Things have been cut away from you. Relationships have been severed. Dreams have been felled. Parts of yourself have had to die so other parts could live. This wasn't gentle. It hurt. It still hurts when you remember. But it was necessary. You couldn't become who you are now without losing who you were then. You couldn't grow into this version of yourself without being cut away from previous versions. The blade had to fall. The saw had to bite. The old had to be cleared away to make room for the new. The Luba carvers would sometimes add other materials to their work. Beads made from shells, metal pins hammered into the wood, pigments rubbed into carved grooves. These additions weren't decoration. They were part of the meaning. Each color symbolized something. Each metal represented a concept. Each bead marked a specific type of knowledge. The Lukasa memory boards were covered with these additions. Reading them required understanding what each element meant. A copper pin might represent a specific king. A cowrie shell might mark a founding village. A blue bead might indicate a particular migration route. The pattern of these elements, their arrangement relative to each other, created a complex text that preserved historical and spiritual knowledge. This required a sophisticated, symbolic system. Everyone in Luba culture had to learn at least the basics of this language. Children were taught to recognize certain patterns. Elders could read the boards at deeper levels, and the initiated few could extract the complete knowledge encoded in the arrangement. You've developed your own symbolic language over the years, haven't you? You've learned to read signs that younger people miss. You notice patterns in behavior that reveal what's really happening beneath surface appearances. You interpret silences and gestures and small changes in tone. You've become fluent in the subtle language of human interaction that can't be learned from books, but only from decades of close attention. The carvers worked with an understanding that their art would outlast them, that the stools and staffs and boards they created would be used by people they'd never meet, would carry meaning into futures they couldn't imagine, would preserve knowledge after their own memories had turned to dust. This gave their work a particular quality, a kind of care that comes from knowing you're creating something permanent in a temporary world, that your hands are touching wood that other hands will touch centuries later, that you're part of a chain of human effort stretching backward to ancestors and forward to descendants you'll never know. You think about this chain now, don't you? You think about the people who came before you, the ones who built what you inherited, who created the world you were born into, who made choices that shaped your possibilities. You didn't know most of them, but their actions reached forward in time and touched your life. And you think about the people who will come after you, who will inherit what you leave behind, who will live in a world partially shaped by your choices and actions. You'll never know most of them either, but your life is reaching forward, touching futures you can't see. The Luba Kingdom eventually declined. Political conflicts, the slave trade, colonial invasion, the centralized authority fragmented, the elaborate court culture disappeared, the royal workshops closed, many of the master carvers died without apprentices to carry on their knowledge. But the objects remained. The stools and staffs and memory boards survived. They were scattered across museums and private collections around the world, removed from their original context, displayed as art objects rather than functional sacred tools, viewed by people who couldn't read them, who didn't know their language, who saw beauty but missed meaning. This is a kind of tragedy. Knowledge encoded in wood, but the code lost. Meanings carefully carved, but no one left who can interpret them completely. The objects survived, but their full significance died with the culture that created them. You know this feeling, don't you? You carry knowledge that you're not sure will survive you, ways of doing things that you've never explained to anyone, understanding that lives in your hands and your habits, but not in words. You worry sometimes that when you're gone, certain things will be lost because you're the last one who knows them. But here's what the Luba carvers would tell you. The objects themselves carry teaching. Even when the original meaning is obscured, even when the full code is lost, the quality of the work still speaks. The care evident in the carving, the skill visible in the smooth surfaces, the thought apparent in the balanced compositions. These things teach even without words. Your life is like this. The way you've lived, the care you've taken, the effort you've made. These things teach even when you're not consciously teaching. People watch how you handle difficulty, how you treat others, how you maintain your dignity and kindness even when things are hard. They're learning from you whether you intend to teach or not. The wood the carvers used had its own voice. Different species sounded different under the blade. Some woods cut easily, almost singing as the knife passed through. Others resisted, dense and stubborn, requiring force and patience. Some woods were brittle, prone to splitting. Others were flexible, forgiving of mistakes. The carvers learned to listen to wood, to hear what it was telling them, to adjust their approach based on what the material required, to work with the grain rather than against it, to respect the wood's nature rather than trying to force it to behave differently than it could. This is mastery, isn't it? Not forcing, not controlling, but listening, responding, adapting, working with what is, rather than insisting it become what it isn't. You've learned this. You've learned that you can't force people to change, can't make situations become what you want them to be, can only work with what's actually there, responding with skill and patience to the reality in front of you. As you lie here now, your breathing has become so slow, so deep, so steady. You're drifting in that space between waking and sleep, that liminal zone where thoughts float rather than march, where images arise without effort, where time becomes fluid and the boundaries between past and present dissolve. In this space, you can almost see them, the Luba carvers, working by firelight, hands moving surely across wood, chips falling like snow, the emerging form taking shape under patient, skilled attention, hour after hour, night after night, year after year, creating objects that would outlast empires. They worked knowing their work mattered, not because anyone told them so, not because they sought recognition, but because they could feel it, could sense that they were doing something important, something sacred, something that connected them to their ancestors and their descendants, something that made their individual lives part of something larger and more enduring. You felt this too. Moments when what you were doing felt important beyond its immediate purpose, when you knew you were participating in something meaningful, when your actions connected you to something larger than yourself. These moments don't come every day, but when they do, they illuminate everything. They remind you why you're here, what life is for. The carvers would finish a piece and step back, would examine it in different lights, would run their hands over every surface, feeling for imperfections, would make final adjustments, small corrections, tiny improvements that no one else might notice, but that they couldn't ignore. Then, finally, they would declare it complete, would release it from their care, would allow it to become what it was meant to be, a tool for a king, a memory board for the elders, a staff for ceremonial use. Whatever its purpose, it was ready now. It had been transformed from tree to sacred object, from raw material to carrier of meaning. This letting go is its own skill, isn't it? Knowing when something is finished, when you've done all you can do, when it's time to stop refining and start releasing, when holding on would damage rather than improve. You've learned this through experience, through times when you held on too long, through times when you let go too soon, through the gradual development of judgment that can't be taught but only earned. Your breathing is so peaceful now. Your body is completely relaxed. The darkness around you feels safe, gentle. You're held by the bed beneath you like the carved figures held up the king's seat, supported, allowed to rest, given permission to simply be without doing, without striving, without effort. The story of the Luba carvers is reaching towards something important, something about how we transform raw material into meaning, how we take what we're given and shape it into something that matters, how we participate in chains of teaching and learning that extend far beyond our individual lives. But we're only halfway through this journey. There's more to discover, more connections to make, more understanding to unfold. The carvers are still working in the firelight. The wood is still speaking. The patterns are still revealing themselves. You're sinking deeper now into rest. Your body knows how to do this, how to let go layer by layer, how to release the day, how to surrender to the night. And as you sink, the story of the Luba carvers continues to unfold around you like smoke, like memory, like the wood shavings that fell from their blades centuries ago. The carvers understood something profound about time. They knew that the tree they were carving had been growing for decades, maybe centuries, before they touched it. They knew the object they were creating would exist for decades, maybe centuries after they died. They were the brief moment of transformation between these two eternities. The present moment where past became future, where raw material became finished art. This is where you live now too, isn't it? In the awareness of time's passage. You remember the past with unusual clarity. You can see the future approaching with unusual honesty. You stand in the present moment, aware of both directions, aware of what came before and what's coming after. This awareness changes everything about how you experience each day, each hour, each breath. The Luba people believed that time wasn't linear, that past, present, and future existed simultaneously, that the ancestors weren't gone but present, that the unborn weren't absent but waiting, that everything was connected in a great web of relationship that transcended what we think of as time. The carvers worked within this understanding. When they carved a Lukasa memory board, they weren't just recording the past. They were making it present. They were bringing the ancestors into the now. They were ensuring that what happened before would continue happening, would continue teaching, would continue shaping the present moment. Each carved line was a pathway for knowledge to travel. Each embedded bead was a door the ancestors could pass through. Each pattern was a map that connected then to now to later. The board itself was a kind of time machine, allowing people in the present to access what people in the past knew and to pass it forward to people in the future. You carry your own version of this, don't you? You're a Lukasa yourself, a living memory board. Your body carries the marks of your experiences. Your hands remember skills learned decades ago. Your heart holds the imprint of everyone you've loved. Your mind preserves stories that would otherwise be lost. You're a vessel for knowledge traveling through time. The carvers would sometimes work in groups for the largest projects. Several men carving different components that would be assembled into a single object. They had to coordinate their efforts, had to ensure that the pieces would fit together, had to maintain consistent quality across different hands. This required communication, mutual understanding, trust. Each carver had to believe the others would do their part well, had to be willing to have his work judged alongside theirs, had to set aside ego for the sake of the collective creation. You've been part of such collaborations, haven't you? Times when you worked alongside others toward a shared goal, when success required everyone doing their part, when you had to trust people and be trustworthy yourself, when the outcome depended on coordination and mutual respect and everyone caring about the whole as much as their individual contribution. These experiences taught you things solitary work never could. They taught you about dependence and reliability, about communication and compromise, about the strength that comes from unity and the fragility that comes from discord. You learned that some things can only be accomplished together, that certain kinds of beauty require multiple hands. The finished Luba pieces were ritually activated before use. A carver didn't just hand over a completed stool or staff. There were ceremonies, prayers, offerings. The object had to be introduced to the spirits, had to be blessed by the elders, had to be invested with the authority or power it would carry. This activation was crucial. Without it, the object was just wood. Well-carved wood, beautiful wood, skillfully shaped wood, but just wood. The ceremony transformed it from thing into vessel, from object into participant in the sacred order, from carving into living tool. Your life has had these moments too, hasn't it? Initiations, ceremonies, moments when you crossed the threshold and became something you hadn't been before. A wedding made you a spouse. A birth made you a parent. A death made you an orphan. A retirement made you something beyond your profession. These weren't just changes. They were transformations. They activated new aspects of who you were. The carvers knew their work was dangerous in a way. Sacred objects carried power. They mediated between human and spiritual realms. They could heal but also harm. They demanded respect, proper handling, correct usage. To misuse them was to invite disaster. So the carvers built protections into their work. Certain designs were protective. Certain woods resisted negative forces. Certain additions of metal or shell created spiritual boundaries. The object itself was made to be as safe as possible for those who would use it properly, and as dangerous as possible for those who would misuse it. You understand this kind of double-edged power, don't you? You've wielded influence that could help or harm depending on how you used it. You've possessed knowledge that could enlighten or damage. You've had authority that could protect or oppress. You've learned to be careful with your own power, to use it responsibly, to recognize that strength requires restraint. The wood itself went through stages of transformation. Fresh cut, it was wet and heavy. It had to be dried carefully or it would crack and warp. Too fast and the wood would split. Too slow and it might rot. The carver had to manage this drying process with attention and patience. Once dry, the wood became workable. But even then, it continued to change. It would absorb moisture from the air and release it again. It would expand and contract with temperature changes. It would age, developing patina, darkening or lightening, becoming more brittle or sometimes more resilient. The carver worked with wood, knowing it would never stop changing. That even after he finished, even after the object was activated and in use, the wood would continue its slow transformation. He couldn't control this, could only shape the wood in ways that would allow it to age gracefully, that would accommodate change rather than resist it. Your body has been like this wood, hasn't it? Constantly changing, aging, developing its own patina, becoming something different than it was. You couldn't stop this process, could only work with it, could only try to age as gracefully as possible, could only accept the changes and find dignity in them rather than fighting what couldn't be fought. The Luba carvers had favorite tools, blades they'd used for years, decades even. These tools became extensions of their hands. They knew exactly how each one cut, what angle worked best, how much pressure to apply. The tools became so familiar, they were almost invisible. The carver didn't think about the blade, he thought about the wood. The tool disappeared in use. But these tools required care. They had to be sharpened regularly, cleaned, oiled, stored properly. A dull blade was worse than no blade at all. It would tear wood rather than cutting it cleanly. It would require excessive force. it would produce inferior work no matter how skilled the carver. So maintaining tools was part of the craft. Not the glamorous part, not the creative part, but essential. The carver who neglected his tools would soon find himself unable to work well, regardless of his knowledge or vision. You've learned this truth too, haven't you? That maintenance matters as much as use. The tools, whether physical or mental or emotional, require care. That you have to tend to the things that allow you to function. Your body is a tool that requires maintenance. Your mind is a tool that needs care. Your relationships are tools that demand attention. Neglect any of these, and your ability to do good work suffers. Some Luba carvers specialized in particular types of objects. One man might be known for his stools, another for his staffs, another for memory boards. They would perfect their specialty over decades, would become the person everyone sought for that particular kind of work. This specialization allowed for incredible refinement. The stool carver would explore every possible variation within his form, would develop techniques specific to that object, would achieve a level of mastery that generalists could never reach. His stools would be recognizably his. Other carvers could look at one and know immediately who made it, but specialization also meant limitation. The stool carver might never make a memory board, might not even know how. His deep knowledge in one area came at the cost of breadth. He made peace with this, understood that mastery required focus, that you couldn't be excellent at everything, that choosing one path meant not walking others. You've lived this choice, haven't you? You specialized in certain things, developed particular skills, became known for specific abilities. This brought recognition and satisfaction, but it also meant there were paths you didn't take, skills you didn't develop, possibilities you didn't explore. You've had to make peace with your choices, had to accept that the life you lived meant not living other lives. The caryatid figures, those supporting women carved into the royal stools, were always depicted with specific features, elaborate hairstyles, scarification patterns on the torso, calm, dignified expressions. These weren't individual portraits. They were idealized types, representations of the feminine principle as Luba culture understood it. But within this standardized form, each carver brought individual interpretation. One might emphasize strength in the shoulders. Another might focus on the grace of the neck. Another might give particular attention to the hands. The basic form remained constant, but individual vision shaped the details. This balance between tradition and innovation, between following established patterns and bringing personal artistry, this was the carver's challenge. He couldn't ignore the conventions. The object had to be recognizable as Luba work, had to fit within established categories. But within those constraints, he could express himself, could bring his particular vision and skill to bear. You've navigated this same balance in your own life, haven't you? You've had to work within established forms, social expectations, professional requirements, cultural norms. But within those constraints, you've found ways to be yourself, to bring your particular gifts, to express your individual nature while still functioning within collective expectations. The carvers taught their apprentices not just technique but philosophy. They would explain why certain forms were important, what they represented, how they connected to larger Luba understandings about power, authority, memory, community. The apprentice wasn't just learning to carve. He was being initiated into a worldview. This meant the training took years. You couldn't rush philosophical understanding, couldn't force someone to grasp the deep meanings embedded in the work. The apprentice had to mature into the knowledge, had to grow into the responsibility of being a carrier of cultural wisdom. The master carver watched this growth carefully. He could see when an apprentice was ready for the next level of teaching, when his character had developed enough to be trusted with deeper knowledge, when his skill had advanced enough to attempt more complex work. The master couldn't rush this, could only guide and wait and trust the process. You've watched people grow this way, haven't you? Children, students, younger colleagues. You've seen how growth can't be forced, how understanding develops at its own pace, how trying to push someone forward before they're ready often pushes them backward instead. You've learned to trust the slow unfolding of human development, to be patient with the process. The wood the carvers preferred came from specific trees in specific locations. They knew which forests produced the best wood, which trees had the right qualities. This knowledge was precious, was passed down through generations. A carver would take his apprentice to these locations, would teach him how to recognize the right trees, would initiate him into this geographical knowledge. But forests change. Trees are cut down or die naturally. What was abundant in one generation might be scarce in the next. The carvers had to adapt, had to find new sources, had to experiment with different woods, had to adjust their techniques to work with whatever materials were actually available. This required flexibility within tradition. They couldn't simply repeat what they'd been taught. They had to innovate, had to solve problems their teachers never faced, had to honor the tradition while also adapting it to change circumstances. Your life has required this same balance, hasn't it? You were taught certain ways of doing things, but circumstances changed. The world shifted. What worked for your parents' generation didn't work for yours. You had to adapt, had to honor what you'd been taught, while also finding new approaches for new challenges. Some Luba carvings depicted animals, crocodiles, leopards, birds. These weren't decorative. Each animal carried symbolic meaning. The crocodile represented patience and a hidden danger. The leopard represented authority and power. Birds represented communication with the spiritual realm. The carver would study real animals to capture their essence, would watch how they moved, how they rested, what made them distinctive. Then he would abstract this knowledge into carved form, would create something that was recognizable as the animal but also clearly stylized, clearly art rather than attempted realism. This abstraction was sophisticated. It required understanding what was essential about the animal and what could be eliminated, what features had to be present for recognition, and what could be simplified or eliminated. It required judgment and artistry and deep observation. You've developed this kind of discernment yourself, haven't you? You've learned what's essential and what's peripheral, what matters and what doesn't, what must be preserved and what can be released. This wisdom came gradually, through experience, through making mistakes about what was important, through learning over time to see clearly what's truly necessary. The carvers worked with an understanding that their art served the community. It wasn't self-expression for its own sake. It was functional. The stools seated leaders. The staffs marked authority. The memory boards preserved knowledge. The objects had jobs to do. They had to work, not just be beautiful. This meant the carver's creativity was channeled toward purpose. He wasn't free to make whatever he wanted. He was making what was needed, what the community required, what would serve collective needs rather than individual whims. But within this service, there was still art, still beauty, still the carver's personal touch. The objects weren't just functional, they were exquisite. The carver brought his full skill to work that served others, didn't hold back his artistry because the work was utilitarian. You've lived with this understanding too, haven't you? Much of your life has been in service to others, to family, to work, to community. Your creativity and skill have been channeled toward meeting needs beyond your own. This hasn't always been easy. Sometimes you've wanted more freedom, more space for pure self-expression. But you've also found that service doesn't preclude artistry, that you can bring your full self to work done for others, that there's satisfaction in using your gifts to meet real needs, that beauty and function aren't opposites but partners. The Lukasa memory boards were read through performance. An elder wouldn't just look at the board and silently decode it. He would hold it, would run his fingers over the patterns, would speak aloud the knowledge it contained, would tell stories, would sing, would engage his whole body in the act of reading. This meant the board wasn't complete in itself. It required human activation to release its knowledge. It was a prompt, a trigger, a catalyst for memory and performance. The knowledge wasn't in the wood alone. It was in the relationship between wood and reader, between object and performer. Different readers could extract different knowledge from the same board. Each person brought their own training, their own associations, their own memories to the reading. The board was consistent, but the performances varied. The object held stable, while the interpretations flowed and changed. You understand this, don't you? You've learned that meaning isn't fixed, that the same experience can be understood differently at different times, that what something meant to you at 30 isn't what it means at 60. The event stays the same, but your reading of it changes. You bring different understanding to the same memories as you age and grow. The carvers sometimes made mistakes. A blade would slip, a piece would crack, a design wouldn't work as planned. These mistakes were part of the process, inevitable. Even master carvers with decades of experience would occasionally err. What mattered was how they responded. An experienced carver could often incorporate the mistake into a new design, could adapt, could find a way to make the error part of the beauty, rather than a flaw to be hidden, could turn accident into innovation. This required flexibility and creativity and humility, required admitting the mistake rather than pretending it didn't happen, required trusting that the work could absorb imperfection and still be valuable, required understanding that perfection wasn't the goal. Meaning was the goal. Beauty was the goal. Service was the goal, and these could accommodate imperfection. You've had to learn this lesson repeatedly, haven't you? You've made mistakes, many of them. Some small, some large. Some you could fix, some you couldn't. What mattered was how you responded, whether you could adapt, whether you could incorporate your errors into a life that still had value and beauty despite imperfection. The Luba Kingdom's decline meant many carving traditions were lost. Specific techniques that weren't written down because they were passed hand to hand. Symbolic meanings that weren't recorded because everyone knew them, so they didn't need recording. Ways of working that seemed so obvious, they didn't require explanation until there was no one left who remembered. This loss is profound, irretrievable. There are Luba objects in museums that no one can fully read anymore. The code is partially lost. The complete meaning has slipped away. We can admire the artistry, but we can't access the full knowledge they were meant to carry. This speaks to the fragility of human knowledge. How much can be lost in a single generation? How what seems permanent and obvious can disappear if it's not actively transmitted. How cultural memory requires living carriers, not just preserved objects. You feel this fragility acutely now, don't you? You're aware of how much you know that you've never fully shared. How much could die with you if you don't pass it on. How even things you have tried to teach might not survive. Because the next generation has different priorities, different needs, different ways of understanding. But here's what brings comfort. Even partial survival is still survival. Even incomplete transmission still transmits something. The Luba objects that remain, even with their meanings partially lost, still teach, still inspire, still carry forward something of the vision that created them. Your life will be like this too. Not everything you are will be remembered. Not everything you've learned will be passed on, but something will survive. The way you treated people, the care you took with your work, the love you gave. These things echo forward even when they're not consciously remembered. They shape the people who knew you, and those people shape others. Your influence ripples outward in ways you'll never track or measure. The carvers believed that wood had memory, that it remembered the forest, that even after being carved, it still carried something of its origin, that the tree it had been remained present in the object it became. This wasn't metaphor to them. It was literal truth. The wood remembered, and in remembering, it connected the carved object back to the earth, back to the ecosystem, back to the cycles of growth and decay that govern all living things. Modern science has discovered that trees do, in fact, have a kind of memory, that they respond to past experiences, that they communicate through root systems, that they're more alive, more aware, more interconnected than we once believed. The Luba carvers knew this centuries ago, not through microscopes or experiments, but through close attention and respect for the materials they worked with. You've developed similar knowledge in your own domain, haven't you? You know things about people, about relationships, about how life works that you couldn't prove scientifically, but you know to be true. You've learned through attention and experience, through decades of close observation, through respect for the complexity of human existence. The physical act of carving was meditative for the Luba artists. The repetitive motion, the focused attention, the hands working while the mind stilled. Hours would pass without the carver noticing. He'd enter a flow state where time disappeared and there was only the work. In this state, the carver wasn't thinking about technique. His hands knew what to do. He wasn't planning the next cut. His body responded to the wood automatically. He was present but not effortful, engaged but not struggling, working but also resting. This paradoxical state, where you're completely active and completely relaxed simultaneously, this is what mastery feels like. When you've done something so many times that effort becomes effortless, when your skill is so deep, it operates below conscious thought. You've experienced this. Maybe not in carving, but in something else. Something you've done so many times you don't have to think about it anymore. Your hands just move. Your body just knows. And in that knowing, there's a kind of peace, a kind of meditation, a rest that exists inside activity. As you lie here now, you're in your own meditative state. Your body completely still. Your mind quiet but aware. You're not trying to sleep, but sleep is approaching. You're not forcing rest, but rest is finding you. You're simply present, simply here, simply breathing in the darkness. The Luba carvers would sometimes sign their work in subtle ways, a particular pattern that was distinctively theirs, a small symbol hidden in the design, a characteristic they developed that other carvers would recognize. These signatures weren't about ego. They were about accountability, about taking responsibility for the work, about being willing to be known by what you created. This required courage, required being willing to be judged, required confidence in your skill, but also acceptance that not everyone would appreciate it, that criticism would come, that your work would outlast you and be evaluated by people with different standards, different aesthetics, different needs. You've signed your life in similar ways, haven't you? The choices you've made, the relationships you've built, the work you've done. These are your signature. They identify you. They're how you'll be remembered. And like the carvers, you've had to make peace with being known by what you've created, with being judged, with not being able to control how people interpret your work after you're gone. The wood shavings that fell from the carver's blade weren't wasted. They were collected and used, sometimes burned in ceremonies, sometimes used in protective medicines, sometimes simply returned to the earth to nourish new growth. Nothing was discarded carelessly. This reflects a worldview where everything has value, where even waste products have purpose, where the full cycle of use must be honored. The carver was responsible not just for the object he created, but for everything that resulted from its creation. You've learned to think this way too, haven't you? To consider consequences, to think about the full impact of your actions, to recognize that you're responsible not just for what you intend, but for everything that results from what you do. This awareness has made you more careful, more thoughtful, more conscious of the ripples your life creates. The sacred objects the carvers made were eventually destroyed or transformed. Royal stools were burned when dynasties fell. Staffs were broken when new authorities rose. Memory boards were lost or scattered. Nothing lasted forever in its original form. But this impermanence was understood and accepted. The carvers knew their work was temporary even as they made it to last. They held both truths simultaneously, made objects designed for durability while accepting that nothing endures unchanged, created with care, knowing that destruction was inevitable. This is wisdom, isn't it? Creating anyway, caring anyway, doing your best work anyway, even though you know it won't last forever. You've learned to do this in your own life, to invest in things you know are temporary, to care for relationships that will end, to build knowing that everything you build will eventually fall. You do it anyway because the doing matters, because the care matters, because the attempt itself has value regardless of the outcome. Your breathing now is so soft, so steady, like distant waves, like wind in trees, like the rhythm the carvers knew when they worked in silence, listening to their blades whisper through wood. The final smoothing of a carved object was done with materials from the earth: fine sand, crushed stone, plant fibers. The carver would work these materials over the wood surface, polishing, refining, creating a finish that was both beautiful and protective. This finishing work required patience different from the carving itself. It was repetitive, tedious even. It didn't show the dramatic progress that carving showed, just gradual refinement, slow improvement. The kind of work where you couldn't see results moment to moment, but over hours and days, the transformation became undeniable. This is the work of later life, isn't it? Not dramatic change, but gradual refinement. Not radical transformation, but slow polishing. You're not becoming someone fundamentally different at this point. You're becoming more fully yourself, more refined, more polished, more complete. The Luba carvers sleep now in the earth that grew the trees they carved. Their hands are dust, their eyes are closed, their breath has stopped, but their work remains. In museums, in private collections, in the cultural memory of the Luba people, in the influence they had on the apprentices who learned from them and taught others in turn. They live in their work, not metaphorically, actually. When you look at a Luba carving, you're seeing their hands move, you're witnessing their choices, you're engaging with their vision. They're present in the object, speaking across centuries, teaching still. You will be like this too, present in what you've made, what you've built, who you've loved, how you've lived. The specific details might be forgotten, your name might be lost, but your influence will persist. Your care will echo forward. Your life will matter long after you're gone. And now, after this long journey through the forests of Central Africa, through the workshops of Luba carvers, through the philosophy embedded in wood and the wisdom carved into memory boards, after traveling so far in time and space, you can rest. You've been held tonight by a story larger than yourself. You've connected to artists you never met who understood things you understand. You've traced the arc of craft and care and creation across centuries. You've seen yourself reflected in hands long since turned to dust. This connection across time, this recognition of shared humanity, this knowing that what you feel has been felt before and will be felt again, this is comfort, this is peace, this is the reason stories matter, why we tell them, why we listen, why we carry them forward. The Luba carvers would want you to rest now, would want you to stop striving, would want you to simply be the way the finished carving simply is. Complete, worthy, enough. Your life, like their carvings, is a transformation of raw material into meaning. You've taken what you were given and shaped it into something. Not perfect, not without flaws or cracks or mistakes, but yours, real, made with care and effort and the accumulation of decades of skill. Rest in that knowledge. Rest in the completion you've achieved. Rest in the understanding that you've done what you could with what you had, that you've carved your life as well as you knew how, that the marks you've made matter even if you can't see all the ways they matter. The fires die down now. The workshop grows dark. The carvers set aside their tools. The wood rests. The patterns hold their meaning in silence. The stories settle like dust. And you settle too, into this bed, into this breath, into this moment, into the vast, gentle darkness that holds all things, that held the forests, that held the carvers, that holds you now. Let your thoughts drift away like wood shavings on water, like smoke rising from sacred fires, like embers cooling in the night. The world grows still. The ancient trees sleep. The carved objects rest in their distant museums. The knowledge waits patiently in patterns of wood and bead and metal. And you rest too. You've journeyed far through time tonight, through centuries, through cultures, through the hands and hearts of artists who understood that transformation is sacred, that care matters, that what we make outlasts us. Now it's time to journey into dreams, to let the images and ideas settle into your sleeping mind, to allow your unconscious to work with what you've heard, to trust that meaning will emerge in its own time, in its own way. Close your eyes. Feel the weight of your body. Feel the softness beneath you. Feel your breath moving in and out like the tide, like the seasons, like time itself. You are held. You are safe. You are exactly where you need to be. The Luba carvers carved in firelight, and you rest in darkness, and both of you are doing sacred work. They transformed wood. You're transforming consciousness. They created objects. You're creating peace. Breathe. Release. Rest. Let sleep find you the way the carver's blade found the form hidden in wood. Let it come naturally, inevitably, without force or effort. You've done enough. You are enough. You can stop now. The fires die down, the stories settle, and the world grows still. Let your thoughts drift away like embers on the wind. Good night. You've journeyed far through time tonight. Now it's time to journey into dreams. Close your eyes. Breathe. And let sleep find you.